I used to think that you have to figure things out by kind of not brute force, but well, we could say deduction, by deduction. Well, this is my background in mathematics speaking, you got your principles and you deduce things, which there's nothing wrong with. I still do that, but that's not where my real insights come from. When I get real insights, it's not from deduction. It never is. I think it is. It's like I like it to be, because it would make things a lot easier, if you could just figure out everything through deduction. It's kind of fun to do that work. The work of deduction. It's a fun thing. Well, maybe not for everyone, but for someone like me, it is. But I've come to accept the fact that it, like I said, took me a while. That real insights don't come from deduction at all. They come from, the story of what's the name of that story? Eureka story. The Eureka story. Archimedes, right? Where he's trying to find out the how do you know if something is gold? He wants the crown of the king is actually gold or a counterfeit. And then, so how does he find it? He tries to find it, but he can't. And then he finds it when he's taking a bath. You see, he finds it when he's in his bath. It's not when he's trying to find it that he finds it. It's nature that gives him the answer. He's in his bath, and then he realizes, oh yeah, the water's displaced when I'm in my bath. And it's like the answer is revealed to him by some reality.
Matthieu is an author, and an author of a particular important book, which is called The Language of Creation, which is, in my view, at least, and in the view of others, a very important book on sacred symbolism. And the reason why it's so important is because it articulates sacred symbolism that actually is not even articulated by what people that are considered the greats, like Guénon. So it's an important addition to understanding the deep symbolism of the Bible, which is, as we know, the symbolism of actually creation. And so I read this book quite a while ago, and I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. So it's a real pleasure to have you here, and also to if you want to look into stuff, conversations that Matthieu's had. He's spoken to Jordan Peterson, which is a very large program, and you can look at his work there. But how are you, Matthieu? We talked a bit before we started talking now, but how are you going there in the wilderness of Cuba? Is it Quebec that you're in?
Yeah, Quebec, exactly. Yeah, so northern Canada. What's northern Quebec? So yeah, it's cold. It's all the same at winter time. I always have this idea before the winter starts that I'm going to be cozy with a fire going and stuff like that. I'm going to be able to work, but it's never that. It's always really harsh. It's always just cutting wood, getting water. It's like that. It takes my whole day basically shoveling snow. It's like every autumn I get this idea. This winter I'm going to just, remain and watch the fire, stoke the fire, and try to write, and it never happens. So it's kind of I gotta learn my lesson, because I always underestimate the winter, and this winter was a little bit colder than usual. Actually, had a lot of snow too. Yeah, that's how it goes. I'm still gonna write my stuff, but it's gonna be a little.
Yeah, well, and I'm looking forward to talking about how that's going and what you're working on, especially this new book, because I've read some of your tweets about it and the like. But it sounds like you're kind of living a monastic life out there a little. It just reminds me a little of Seraphim Rose.
Yeah, it's kind of just happened like that. I wanted to grow food. Basically, that's what I wanted to do. Because I need someone who had some land, and I wanted to build some greenhouses. That's what I wanted to do, and learn how to grow food, because I had no idea, and I kind of felt like this is what I had to do. So I kind of tried to do that, but it didn't work out, and I ended up just living in a yurt somewhere. So that's kind of what happened by accident. I'm glad about it, but at one point, hopefully, I'm gonna kind of move on to something else. I'm hoping one day.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not complaining. I'm getting a lot of benefits from it. A lot of insights, let's say, about life, about reality and life and
Yeah.
nature. It's kind of what I needed to do. It's like not what I decided to do, but it kind of happened, and now I'm grateful for it because
Mm.
I'm understanding things a lot differently than I used to. Because I studied mathematics, and so I
Mm.
had a really abstract mind and kind of computer science as well. It was both.
Mm.
So I was really into abstraction, that's kind of my natural state. But then when
Mm.
this stuff started happening to me, I kind of changed a little bit my way of thinking. And
Mm.
now I'm starting to see something that I've never thought was possible before, which is that really simple things contain a lot of information, like really
Mm.
simple, concrete things. If you look at them in the right way, and if you like ruminate, this is what I call it, you ruminate on it. Um,
Yeah.
you find information contained in simple things, and then you can use that to interpret ancient texts. You can use that to I use the Bible, but I know that I could also interpret other texts if I wanted, but I don't do that. I don't do comparative religion. I mostly stick to the Bible. I'm mostly interested in the Old Testament, actually, for
Yeah.
my own personal reasons. But obviously, I'm a Christian. I am interested in the New Testament as well, obviously. But right now, it's like I'm trying to work out some of the meaning of the old stories, because I think some of it
Mm.
is lost. So it's kind of the idea is to kind of return to a more natural way of thinking. Like get away from
Yes.
technology a little bit and get away from certain ideas that we have, and kind of go back to what's important, because we kind of lost that. What's important, if you put their importance in the right order, then
Mm.
you interpret things completely differently. And this is what I mean when I say simple things contain a lot of information, because if you use them
Mm.
as a lens, you use
Yeah.
certain, well, if you do symbolism, you know what I mean. You can have very simple ideas. Like, just for example, the idea of a seed. It's like, what's a
Mm.
seed? So if you do agriculture, which I never did before, but now I'm doing, it's like now
Mm.
I'm getting some real insights into this. And all these things that are really just natural, that we kind of take for granted as well. Like now I'm working a lot with the idea of sleeping, and this is
Yeah.
something I think we really take for granted. Just this crazy reality that we fall asleep. It's
Mm.
crazy stuff when you don't take it for granted, and you realize, what is this thing we fall. It's like we lose consciousness every
Yeah.
day. I've said this before in
Yeah.
other podcasts, but I'm always amazed by how this is taken for granted. Like, uh,
Mm.
if you don't take this phenomenon for granted, then you start interpreting things with this idea of sleep as important. So this is
Yeah.
what I've started to do. This is basically what I'm working on now. So then, if you read the stories in the Bible and you don't take this thing called sleeping for granted, then you start to see
Mm.
certain patterns, and you understand them in relation to sleep. So this is basically what I'm doing now. So it's about dream
Yeah. It,
interpretation, but it's about the whole idea of sleep. You know?
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. There's a whole world that religion allows one to expand into, which is represented by sleep. It's the night side of history, whereas we live in the factical world of things, where people use the surface layer to try penetrate into abstractions and deduce the laws of reality, when actually you can interact with the ground of reality. And part of that is actually going into sleep. Part of that is in the mystical process. This is why the vigil. This is why these midnight vigils happen in monastic societies, because you are closer. The Lord's closer. You are in initiation, or in you are going to sleep. You are at the same time as waking up. So it's incredibly important. Also, you begin in the world. That's the only way the unconscious can talk to you, is through dreams. Um, it becomes, or your conscience, you could call it your conscience too, is another, your angel is the only way he can communicate to you, because you're so wrapped up in worldly affairs. But as you develop, it can be communicated through symbolism, through uh, even reality. Once you're and this is what's so helpful about understanding symbolism. Firstly, to interpret the dreams, because it's a means of communication. Also, a clue not interfering too much with your freedom at the same time is what's helpful about, I think, partly the reason why it's communicated in that way. But what I found with that symbolism is it's not, of course, it is a great understanding. It, like you said, it allows a more concrete view of reality, because that's we spring up out of that. But also, when you understand it, you realize that, oh, I'm actually being spoken to through this symbolism in reality. Not all the time, but miraculously, say with birds, that the Lord speaks through birds a lot if you actually pay attention and understand what it means. The language of the birds is a real thing. People don't recognize that, but it is. It's not just a symbol. It's actually used all the time and coincides with other faculties that the mystical process discloses, and those coincidences together help stack up a certainty for you when you're watching them. It's not just a bird, it's also other elements that happen to you internally that coincide to help you have a certainty over those things. So I think that's really important, what you're working on, especially because so much of... Oh, sorry, jump in. Yep.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, in general, like you said, not just with regard to dreams, but like you said, in general, just symbolism in general. I think this is the natural human way of interacting with reality, symbolism. It's not like something made up or anything like that. I think it's the ancient language that all humans had, and we kind of lost, some more than others. And it's like, it's the opposite of what most people think about when they say symbolism. They think of an arbitrary meaning, jambalaya. It's like you can just make anything mean anything, but really that's not true. I think the closer you are to reality, create reality, the less you think like that. The less you think things are arbitrary. It's like when doing, let's say, for example, you're doing agriculture, you know what a seed is. You can't assign another meaning to this reality than the one that is. You know the implications of it because you see them. You can't make up meaning. You can't make up some arbitrary meaning about what a leaf is or a flower is or a seed is, because you know what it is. It's there. It's in nature. It's not made by humans. You see what I'm saying? It's a natural language, really, and it expands also to technology and things like that. I mean, it expands to everything. At the basis of it, I think it's like the natural language of humanity, and I think all religious texts are written in that language, really. And I think a lot of it is more simple than most people think. It's simple ideas that have a lot of implications, and it's like if you don't see the implications in an idea, then you think it's empty. But that's the thing. If you're not connected to reality, then you don't know these implications. You see, if you're not connected to, like, for example, here's an example. I mean, a really basic example. If it says in the story of Genesis that Adam and Eve were in a garden, if you're not connected to reality and you've never been in a garden or you've never tried to have a garden, create a garden, you don't think it has meaning to say that they're in a garden. But if you dealt with gardens, you know what gardens are. You know that they're a kind of a balance of nature and art, nature and work, or something like that. Technology and nature. It's a balance. That's what a garden is. It's not an arbitrary meaning that I'm assigning to this thing called a garden, But if you don't know what a garden is and you never worked in one, you ever thought about it, you just read the story, and the fact that it says they're in a garden just goes right over your head. It's like it's just describing a fact, like a forensic fact that happened, But if you know what gardens are, then you obviously know the implications, and then you realize that this is a big pattern. This pattern of the idea of a garden, the pattern of nature and civilization balanced, because a good garden is a balance of those things. You got to keep it a little bit wild, and you got to make it straight, but keep it keep it round at the same time, if you understand what I mean. So this is a big pattern that you can use to interpret almost all of reality with. So right there in the story of the garden, there's just this little information that they're in a garden is already enough to understand a whole lot if you see the implications of it. And then when you read the Bible, then you interpret everything in light of this idea of a garden. And this is just one example. You see what I'm saying? It's just one example. You can take anything in the Bible and do that with it. And mostly in the story, early stories are really potent. You know, the early stories, like the story of Adam and Eve, is the most potent story for me, at least, that I've ever seen. Like the information contained in that story is so dense. It really is a story that has massive information in it. And if you can see the implications of it, then the whole rest of the Bible can be interpreted with these little patterns. You know, the snake, the tree, Adam, Eve. You know, the tree of knowledge, the tree of life. If you try to understand the simple patterns that are shown right at the beginning, everything else can be understood with that. But it takes time. Obviously, you can't just snap your fingers. You know, you have to reflect on it. You have to work at it.
That's
obviously. And when I say work at it, I also mean not just with the text, but with reality. You know, you have to know what these things are. It's like what, for example, I mean,
with them.
If you just say, I'm just taking some random examples here about how to think correctly about these things, but it's like, okay, their food was from a tree. It talks about fruits in the garden. So what? Oh, there's different kinds of foods. You have to think like that, you know, concretely, but at the same time, you see the implications. There's some foods that are in trees, and there's some foods that grow in the ground. What does that mean? You know, then you can ask yourself, what's the implication of food growing in trees versus food growing in the ground? Or what's the implication of food as it pertains to hunting and food as it pertains to grazing, you know, being a shepherd? And then these simple, these are really concrete things, you know, these are not like abstractions. They're like really concrete lifestyles and concrete realities. But then you realize a lot of implications there. So if it says, for example, Esau was a hunter, then you got to realize all the implications. What does that mean, being a hunter? You know, so, I mean, I don't necessarily want to get into it here, but it's like this is the kind of simple idea that you got to get in your head and start thinking about. And it's like, what's the difference between a shepherd and a hunter? Well, this one finds his food in the wild. I mean, it's basic stuff, but he finds his wild food. He gets wild meat. What does that mean? You know, and this one has meat that he's himself has tended to, you know. What does that mean? And then all the implications are enormous, you know. So the point of all this stuff that I'm saying is just that there's a way to think about symbolism that is really, really concrete, and it's really almost, you can understand, like, kind of what you said, why monks kind of just work with their hands, you know. I'm talking as if it was in the past, but monks still exist today, obviously. But you know, why they have this idea that you got to work with your hands, and why you have to do concrete things. You know, you got to learn how to, you know, different traditions of monks. But it's like, you know, learn how to shoot a bow, and you'll learn everything from just that. Or learn how to grow food, and you'll learn everything you need to know about life just from doing this one thing. You know, but it's like you got to extract all the information from it. And it becomes abstract information in the end. It becomes like spiritual, you know. It starts with the hands and it ends way up there if you do it long enough. But it's like it takes a kind of weird humility to do that, because we think we know things. You know, it's hard to believe that there's lots of information in these simple things, but there is. Yeah, we know the surface of these things that are apparently superficial, but if you have the mindset of kind of a humility, you know, you do these things with kind of humility that you're going to learn from them, then it happens, you know. I don't even think you need to read books anymore. The way I think now, it's like you don't need books, but it helps. Obviously, I'm not talking against books. Obviously, as someone who wrote a book, that would be ridiculous. But I mean, you don't actually. Anyone can learn anything from just living a normal life, like a natural life. That's what I think now.
Yes.
Took me a long time to
And
think like this. Actually, I never would have said this before when I was younger.
yeah, no, I think that
Go ahead. Sorry.
it takes that realization. But what you're also speaking about is, or another way of speaking about what you're talking about, is looking to the essence of things. And that is, and people don't take the time to do this anymore. You know, Goethe talks about it. Steiner talked about it. And it's what the monastics have always done. But deep meditation on something is also staring at being or at something long enough until it's at part of its essence is revealed, right? People don't take time to dwell with things, not even just thinking them through, but just looking at reality for long enough, because they're not humble enough. They're just always on to the next proposition. And what ends up happening is we have a society of no one has any contact with truth. And it's not just contact with the world. It's not touching grass, just touching grass. It's looking through that to the essence of things that's behind the creation. That's what happens to monastics. And so you fill your brain with propositions from other people's books, and they all created their books without looking at the world. And so it's all a referential truth, and no one has an actual contact. And it turns out, of course, the truth of the matter is that truth is a person, and it's he. You know, and if you stare long enough, and if you dwell long enough, he discloses himself to you, that's the mystical process, right? And so that can also be applied to things and reality. If you have the humility to wait, but we're all in a rush because we all have capital as our goal. Not all. I mean, I'm not that way anymore. You're not that way anymore. But I was that way, where even implicitly you actually worship the will to power. You actually worship capital because you're trying to feed your family, do this and that, right? But if you actually put that first and you begin looking to find that essence of truth and things and dwelling with things, then you can begin to actually have your life truly revolve around that. But are we willing, as the Lord says, can you not watch with me for an hour? He says, and that's a very serious thing. But who's willing these days? They should be, but to put that holy hour in the day. Most people will always explain it away. Modernity will drive you to say, I don't have time to do that. When it's the most important thing you can do is dwell with these things, and to do those, do that morning holy hour. So that's really the key message there. And I can say from direct experience that if you just dwell with things, if you stare at being, things reveal themselves to you. But you have to actually just take the time day after day after day after day after day and do it, and do the prayer again and again and again without lusting after the result either, just to dwell in it and do it. And these things disclose themselves. There's a whole mystery right out there amongst what you're in that you can't see. And people like, even if you want to, people that are secular, perhaps that are watching a little more secular, is that Jung understood these things, that the collective unconscious isn't just a subjective thing, it's an objective thing. And it's around you right now. Of course, and as we understand, it's angels that are operating in reality. But you can, if you're willing to wait long enough and dwell long enough, you can, these things can disclose themselves to you. Collaboratively, though, you can't do it in a will to power way like the yogis. That doesn't work. But it's if it's granted on the other side. So I completely agree with you in terms of dwelling with things from a mystic perspective. That's very true. And in fact, you also mentioned symbolism as the ground language. I think if you go even before that, I think it's definitely connected with the language of, I think you could say, the language of angels. I know that people who are esotericists tried to find some characterological language. It's directly transmitted. That's what the language of angels is. It's something that's non-verbal. It's pre-verbal. And so symbolism is far closer to it than any proposition or any word. So you are getting a deeper level there. I think you're definitely right when you talk about that. Yeah. What do you think of that?
About the concept of a language of birds or language of angels.
I
Is
was
that what
just
you're asking about?
handing it.
What I
I'm
think
just
of
handing it
Beth?
over to you.
Oh, in general.
Yeah, I'm just handing it over to
Yeah.
you.
Okay. Well, in general, yeah. What I well, this is what you're describing. Yeah, it's pretty much how I I think now. It wasn't before. That's the thing. It took me a really long time to see this thing which is kind of, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I used to think that you have to figure things out by kind of not brute force, but, well, we could say deduction, by deduction. Well, this is my background in mathematics speaking. You got your principles and you deduce things, which there's nothing wrong with. I still do that, but that's not where my real insights come from. When I get real insights, it's not from deduction. It never is. I think it is. It's like I like it to be, because it would make things a lot easier, if you could just
Yeah.
figure out everything through deduction. It's kind of fun to do that work. The work of deduction. It's a fun thing. Well, maybe not for everyone, but for someone like me, it is.
Yeah.
But I've come to accept the fact that it, like I said, took me a while. That real insights don't come from deduction at all. They
Yes.
come from, like, well, the story of what's the name of that story? Eureka story. The Eureka story. Um, Archimedes, right? Where he's trying to find out the how do you know if something is gold? He wants the crown of the king is actually gold or a counterfeit. And then, so how does he find it? He tries to find it, but he can't. And then he finds it when he's taking a bath. You see, he finds it when he's in his bath. It's not when he's trying to find it that he finds it. It's nature that gives him the answer. He's in his bath, and then he realizes, oh yeah, the water's displaced when I'm in my bath. And it's like the answer is revealed to him by some reality of nature, not some deduction that he did, because it was an idea that he didn't already have in his head. It's like, if you want to learn something new, you got to get it from not you. You got to get it from somewhere that's not already under your control of your mind. It's not already under your conscious understanding. So you got to do another process. No, this is kind of iffy subject, but I used to do a lot. The one thing I did do, even when I was thinking more like a mathematician, one thing I did do, maybe, I don't know why, but I always used to do kind of numerology in my head, like Gematria and things like that, with any language. Well, I did. It started with Hebrew, because when I was younger, I kind of learned Hebrew because I went to read the Bible in the original language. But then when the Gematria stuff started for me, but then it kind of spread out to everything. And then it kind of became automatic, almost like I saw a word, especially when I read the Bible. Let's say I saw the number popped into my head. It's like I didn't even need to do any calculation. Wow. I was so used to it, So it wasn't even on purpose, just numbers popping. Boop, I see the word, and then I see the number, And then doing that, I got some really, really, really high level insights when I was younger, let's say 20 something. But then I learned a lot of lessons from that, in the sense that this is the kind of thing. I understand this phenomenon. Okay, I used to not, even though I did, but I see the place of this phenomenon, which is, I call it this, listening to the animal. This is the language I'm using now. I call that listening to the animal, or listening to nature. And that's Gematria is an example of that, because what you're doing is you're looking at a word, but instead of looking at the meaning of the word, you're kind of looking at the body of the word, the meaningless body, the letters themselves, and then you're finding a fact about it that is actually not meaningful. You find a number that connects to that number is not meaningful. It's a mistake to say that a logic of Gematria Bible and that it's all made with Gematria. I think that's completely false. What it is actually is the opposite of that. It's a way to get a new insight from something an insight that you don't really know. It forces you to make connections between concepts that you. So if you're used to it, you read the Bible and you see this word, you see the number, and then later you see another word, you see the same number, and let's say two completely different words, and then because of that connection, you want to understand the connection between these two concepts. But there's no rational connection sometimes between the two words. They just happen to have the same number. It's not true. That's logical. It's not. But then what happens is, you're forced to think about it. And then in that, it's not the gematria itself that's important. It's the process. It's the process of understanding, because the gematria is just there to give you new connections between things that you didn't previously, you never would have done on your own. Kind of like, that's the thing, kind of like a scientist. That's what science is about too, in my opinion. Real discoveries are not made by deduction. They're made by observation, and then all of a sudden you see some connections, and then, whoop, I never saw connections between these two phenomena. Suddenly I do. I see a relationship, and then you could spend your whole life trying to understand the laws, these new laws that you've found that connect these two phenomena together that you saw as unconnected before. Well, this is what happened to me when I was studying the Bible in Hebrew, is made some connections between words that had no connection, and it forced me to have some really high level insights that I didn't understand until 10, 15 years later, you see, but they always stuck in my head. It's like I connected some ideas. They stayed in my head in a strange way. And I think that's the right attitude to have with these kind of insights. Okay, I think it's actually kind of important to talk about these things, because people go crazy with this stuff. It's kind of a little bit dangerous if you're not careful, if you don't know the place of these insights. So I guess maybe it's okay to talk about this, but to me, this is the kind of thing. It's okay to do these things, but just keep it private. It's like, you don't have to. If you find this weird gematria, you don't have to necessarily tell the world about it, because this was my instinct at first. When I saw these connections, I kind of wanted to tell everyone, my friends and stuff. It's like you get excited about it, and then everyone treated me like I was just ridiculous, crazy. And then I learned quickly to not talk about these things in public, and even with just my friends, even because they kind of pretend they're listening, but I learned quickly, and I think it's important. It's a good lesson that I think I had early in life, which helped me to not go nuts, because some people put too much stock in this kind of stuff, in these kind of insights, and they don't know the place of it. And then they kind of go just, make connections between everything. And then they think it's like high level knowledge. But then when you speak to them, you realize this is not high level knowledge that you have. It's just craziness. You're drunk. It's like you've drank some wine, and you're too much wine, and now you're just going crazy. You're connecting everything together. Everything's one. Okay, it's kind of meaningless. Maybe that's true, but when you're talking about it, it just sounds crazy. So I think it's important to hold this stuff back, put it in its place. It's like the snake in the garden. It's there, but you listen to the snake. It's kind of what gematria is the snake. It's the snake of the underneath the words. It's like, I'm listening to you, snake, but you're not going to convince me to act on it. It's not by your whispering of meaning underneath things that you're going to convince me in any way to act on anything. This is something I understood a long time ago, because you can that mistake. You get an insight. Oh, I did this gematria, and in gematria it said I should go with this girl. And then I go out with this girl, and then she's a completely wrong match for you. Or she's completely not compatible with you, but my gematria told me to do it, so I'm doing it. This is the kind of thing you got to not do. You have to know the place of things. And that's a good. I think very important. And I think, but it's also, I think, important to say that these things have a place. They do have a place, because usually people, it's either you go nuts with it, or you say, oh, this is satanic, or this is just divination. It kind of is a sort of divination, actually, but there's a place for it still. Just don't go nuts. Just don't go crazy. Listen to it. Keep it in the back of your mind for the rest of your life if you have to. And then at one point, it will make sense. Like real logical sense. I mean, real logical sense. I don't mean just you. I mean, a kind of sense that you can even tell others and they'll say, yeah, that makes sense. So instead of having this insight and then telling others, and then they just look at you like you're crazy, all I do is wait long enough, keep it in the back of your head, you know, and then later in life, you probably will have what it takes to make logical sense of it. And then when you tell people with your explanations, you know, then your insight will, you know, we could say bear fruit. It will make sense, and then it'll be received by other people instead of just getting a crooked look, you know, because you said something weird. So I think it's important to know the place of this thing, not completely reject it, but not completely crazy. Because I think nowadays is really, I think there's a lot of craziness going on right now. Frankly, I think it's like we would need an exorcist for the whole world right now. The world is going nuts. It's going completely insane. And I think some of it actually might actually be on purpose. If you want my opinion on some of it on purpose. Like the whole example, the whole Q thing. You remember that? The Q thing. I don't know, maybe you're English, you didn't know about that. But in the United States, it's just an example. It was clearly being done on purpose. Okay. I don't know if you followed a little bit of that, but
I remember.
It's like somebody somewhere was trying to cause psychosis of people. And they were saying everything is meaning, it has meaning. There is no such a thing as a coincidence. There is no detail. Everything is meaningful. And then they'd end up seeing a picture of Tom Hanks with a clock and a pizza and whatever, and then they would go nuts. And the thing is, I think that whole thing was on purpose. I don't know why. I think someone somewhere was trying to cause psychosis in the population, and it worked. It worked. So I'm not going to speculate on who it is and why they were doing it, but to me it was obvious. And I think it's being done still today. It's not like something that happened back then and it's not going on. I think it's still going on, where some agency is trying to, not, I say agents necessarily mean government agency or anything like that. I mean,
no, I know what you mean.
But I mean,
principality
it's trying to make people go, and it could be literally government agency as well, you know. But
maybe with Q, it was
make us go nuts.
That's possible. But if it can dissolve and make things overly opaque, it can distract people from actual real insights, because there's an element to when something is opaque that it can drive you to try figure out the mystery, that there might not be anything there. It could just be people creating sort of puzzles. And I understand what you're talking about with Gematria and all of that. I've looked into that, and I understand divination. I think with divination, what people need to be careful of is that it is, in a sense, you're kind of forcing an answer. It can be a lack of humility, like say the I Ching or something, because you're kind of forcing God to give an answer. You're forcing the divine to give an answer. So when you're brute forcing like that, it depends on you. If you lust after things, or the will to power, and you're trying to get answers for something, then what kind of principality is going to answer you, and where's it going to lead you? Or if you're after the good, if you're doing the good, even so, it's still something you'd be wanting to pray for protection while you're doing it. And as you were mentioning, I think with Gematria, I think you're probably right about that. I'm not sure it's actually the numbers themselves that that carry meaning. I don't think if you break down language into the number, I think you're right. It's more like a tool to trigger actually looking at something that is deeply always connected, because it's the Bible and because it's revelation. Whereas the numbers themselves, I don't think they do. I think they more because I know divination is a legitimate thing. You could call it a opening up a symbolic opportunity for you're opening up a channel for the divine to talk to you, but other things can also participate in that. That's the problem in terms of negative powers, right? It's just a matter of, it depends on what the question is. It depends on that. But when it comes to Gematria, it's just, there is a degree to which it's just seeing patterns and things. But I think what's happening there is it's actually triggered you to actually look at something that does have a connection between everything in it. yeah, I think people like Nick Land or what they're seeing things in Gematria, miracles that just aren't actually there. That it's not useful, and it ends up just being an over opaqueness. He's a philosopher that is quite into Gematria. But yeah, so I think people become obsessed with that. But I think in other divinations are really obvious interactions with the divine, but still, that can even be a thing that can hold you back from your relationship with deeper faculties and in deeper relationship with God and true intuitions. Because you were talking about ideas there, and I agree with you with nature, but also I think a lot of the great ideas that are sent by angels. You are constant, like they're very close to you. It's just that in the modern age we don't recognize this. And I think in modernity we have this arrogance that we grind and come up with these things, but actually a lot of the time they're sent to us. And if you actually pray for it and pray for help to understand things, a general understanding for, say, the Bible, if you deeply pray and ask for help to understand something, you'll find that a general understanding of around the subject will, at least if you're involved in deep mystical practice anyway, a general understanding will begin to emerge for you around the subject that you're praying for and asking for help with. And so I think with all that, the key is humility. But you're right, there's a place for it. There's definitely a place for it. But you should be, people should be careful with it. You know, it's something that should be treated with humility. I think you should wear, you should
Yeah, well,
you
look, I
should
can
be
tell you.
wearing your cross. You should have your have St.
Yeah. No,
Christopher's
no,
icon,
I
have Michael's icon.
agree.
But I agree with you because I've
Yeah,
looked at those things and I've experimented
I
with
agree
them,
that
so I
it's
understand.
yeah. Well, to me, I can tell you how I see this in my understanding, and I think it is actually probably the way it's understood in the Bible, but you're supposed to see it. You know how we say that fortune telling, divination predicts the future. Okay, which I think is
Mm.
true, but the way I see it now is it's more like divination gives you an into the future in the sense that it's something that you're not supposed to know now. It's something that you're not
Yeah.
supposed to know right now.
Yes.
It's for the future.
Yes.
But if you about it like that, it's the right attitude. So if I get an insight that doesn't make sense to me now, it's not logical, rational, okay? But I sense that there's importance to it because it's like a sense that you
Mm.
get. This is important. I don't fully get it, but this is
Mm.
important, okay? And then it's like, but I'm supposed to. This is for the future. I think if that's your attitude, which was what I try to have when this happens. By the way, when I do these kinds of things, I don't even do it on purpose. I don't even decide.
Yeah.
It's not like I say, oh, I'm going to calculate this word here. I just
Mm.
reading and then I see the number because I guess my mind can do it. It's not really hard arithmetic. It's like my mind can do it on its
Yeah.
unconsciously. It just I see the number, so it's not even on purpose. So even if I wanted to not do it, it would still happen. So, but it's
Yeah.
like when I get some weird insight from that, I say to myself, "This is for the future." If it's irrational, because sometimes it's just nothing. Sometimes I see connection and then I just forget about it. But sometimes I get this intuition that this is important. And
Mm.
then when that happens, this is what I say to myself. I know this is important. I don't really get it, but it's for the future, you know?
Mm.
Because when I was younger, I had some insights about things like credit, okay? Like in the Bible, the idea of credit and the idea
Mm.
of interest, okay? Because in the Bible, it's in a few places, um, because, it's all in the translation, but for example, in the Bible, the word for interest is bite, like the
Mm.
bite of a snake, and it was in relation to the snake. The snake bites, and that means interest. And this is the kind of stuff that when I was reading the Bible, I said, "Whoa, this is weird," and I didn't get it
Mm.
at all. Why is this related? Why is the bite of a snake related to interest? And then this is, I kept that in the back of my head, for a long, forever, for until now. And then later in life, I kind of figured it out,
The second part of this conversation is available for fellowship joiners. The links are in the replies. Join my website at scottmannion.com/fellowship or on substack.scottmannion.com.